Good morning to everybody if you're joining live from Israel. I'm Lesley Kaplan. Welcome to Monday Motivation Spotlight, our series which meets every single Monday from 9 to 9:30 a.m. from Israel time. You're welcome to join us from within Israel, from all over the world. We do have some international participation here, and you're also welcome to watch this after the show on Spotify or on YouTube. I do send you the links. We have a fantastic lineup today. Before I introduce our special guest, I'd like to say and remind you all that this series was started as a result of our ongoing challenge, which is an underestimation, the word challenge, that Israel is going through right now, with the aim of expanding and giving exposure to business owners, as well as giving us all inspiration, which we need right now. And the series is also brought to us with our co-host ACI, as well as our sponsor for this month, Israel Properties by Stammelman and Partners. So we're going to get straight into it. We have a great morning and 30 minutes planned for you, for those of you that it is morning. I'd like to introduce our very special guest, who I'm going to spotlight in a moment, Jodi Samuels. Jodi is an entrepreneur. She's known to many of you. She's a business founder. She's had 2 exits, and she's most well known for her book, which I'll show you in a minute, which I'm almost finished reading, as well as for her passion in advancing and advocating for special needs once her youngest daughter was born with Down syndrome. She's shown us resilience. She's going to very much inspire us, and I think we can all learn from it. I'll give you a little bit of a peek at the book that I've almost finished reading, Chutzpah, Wisdom and Wine, which is available also on Amazon's Damascus and English bookstores. Jodi, I'm going to take the spotlight off me for a moment, and I'm going to spotlight you. So let's take it away. I remind you that you're going to be staying on mute, all of you, for the next 25 minutes. Please use the chat. Feel free to write your comments, anything you want in the chat, any questions that you have for Jodi. A reminder, Jodi, you need to turn your screen the other way now. Okay. Yeah, other way. Yeah. Right. Okay. All right. I remind you also, that's better. I remind you to ask your questions not at the very end. Last time there was a question at the very end that we weren't able to get to. So if you have any questions, write it in the chat. Feel free to inspire others by any kind of inspiration that you may have had this week. Jodi, good morning from Israel. Welcome to our show. So happy to have you here.
Thank you, Lesley, for inviting me. And good morning to everyone from Jerusalem, the eternal capital of the Jewish people, and also the eye of the storm, the eye of the world right now. I never imagined that I would be giving my talk from Jerusalem during war with 2 kids in the army, the crazy times that we're living in. So I'm here. I have this crazy life. We've traveled to 90 countries. My kids have been to over 50 traveling kosher Shomer Shabbat on a budget. We host thousands of people in our home, literally every single year for Shabbat meals. We have this open home. We have people from all around the world. My Aliyah journey has been documented very openly to thousands of people, and I'm an activist and advocate for special needs, so I'm always out there. And I'm going to share with you some of the lessons that I have had to learn about the reality of living in challenging times, long before the times were as crazy as they are now. So actually, Hamas is the protagonist in my story. In 2014, we were in Israel during Tzuk Eitan when Hamas started throwing, like the first time they did these mega missiles. We were living in New York. I met my husband when I was 18 on a gap year program in Israel. On our second date, I told him I want to live in Israel and I wanted to have a home, an open home. That was what we decided, except we went to earn money, so to speak, and we lived in all these places in New Zealand and Australia, and we were living in Manhattan. And along the way, I'd become a princess and I'd forgotten my dream of living in Israel. Happy to come in the summers, but when I was here in the summer of 2014, I realized I wanted my children to live in a more meaningful society. And after 22 years of talking about making Aliyah, we went back, and within 2 weeks, we had moved to Israel. So it became our, our 2-week plan. Again, Hamas featured in my story in 2020, 2021. Unfortunately, Hamas was sending rockets to Israel, and my mother was in South Africa, and she passed away from COVID. And Israel had put South Africa on a blacklist, and you couldn't travel there, and it was impossible to get there. The only time I've ever seen Israeli bureaucracy efficient was how quickly they denied my request to travel. And when my mother passed away, there was only a flight that night, and I needed to get on it. And I finally got permission, and we were on the way to the airport, and Hamas promised a barrage of rockets to the airport, and they shut the airport down, and everybody was contacting me, do you know the airport's closed? And I was like, yep, I can see my own real Star Wars in the sky. And eventually the airport let two planes that were on the runway leave, and then they shut the airport for a few days. But thank God I managed to get to the funeral. They held it for me. And I was really happy that I was there at the Shiva, because when I was in high school, I started becoming religious and I went on my own journey, and I was stuck in an 18-year-old narrative of my parents. And when I was sitting at the Shiva, my mother had been this high school teacher for many years, public school, private school, and hundreds of people paid their respects to her for being this amazing school teacher, except I'd known my mother as that scary Mrs. Newman that everybody was terrified of. South Africa's falling apart, and the municipality don't take care of anything. And all the neighbors came and they were like, your mother was the neighborhood activist. Who's going to look after our neighborhood? And then the gardener, who'd been working for my parents for 35 years, he had arrived as an illegal worker. My mother had helped him get his papers and find work and places to stay. And he was crying, and he was like, who's going to look after me? And my mother was one of 8 children. She was actually an orphan. Her parents passed away her mother passed away when she was young. Her father put her and her younger siblings in an orphanage. She was very affected by that, and it affected her ability to show emotion. And I saw all my cousins from all around the world, and they'd be like, your mom hosted my bat mitzvah, she hosted my bar mitzvah, she hosted my 50th wedding anniversary, she hosted my birthday. And I realized my mother was this hostess extraordinaire, and all these stories allowed me to see that my mother was constantly giving, and that's how she showed her love. I came back to Jerusalem, and I was talking to someone at shul, and I said, I'm hosting a huge house of guests. She's like, Jodi, how can you be hosting? You've just come back. And I was like, look, I'm not in Shiva anymore, and it's Shabbat. And we were talking a little bit about my mom, and she said to me, Jodi, you wrote a book and you dedicated to someone else. But she's like, your mom really influenced your journey. And in that moment, I had an epiphany. And that was, sometimes we get stuck in our stories. And this is the most important lesson I can share with you today. Sometimes all of us get stuck. We get stuck in a narrative, we get stuck in a story, and sometimes we just have to move on from that story. So as I said, my husband and I want to move to Israel. So to make money, we lived in all these outback places. We lived all over the world, in New Zealand and Australia. Finally, we moved to New York City in 2000. And we started an organization for young professional Jews who were looking for a Jewish home away from home, with now 10,000 people attend events in 4 cities, in Miami, New York, Jerusalem, Tel Aviv. We've just had our 142nd marriage, I think, that we've just recently celebrated from our events. And here we are, we're living in New York, and we have this good life. We have 2 adorable kids. We have an open home, so much so that the doorman in New York City once said to me, I know what you do. You run a soup kitchen, don't you? You run a soup kitchen for Jewish people. I was like, sort of like a spiritual soup kitchen, I guess, of sorts. But we had great jobs. People would have called us pillars of the community. And if you would have asked these young professionals that were always in our home, they would have said, when we grow up, We want to be just like Gavin and Jodi Samuels. Except February 25th, 2008, my daughter Kayla was born. The doctor walked in and he said the words that would change my life. He said, "Mrs. Samuels, did you do genetic testing?" And I had absolute fear and terror. I knew exactly what he was going to say. He suspected Down syndrome. I have a first cousin with Down syndrome. I knew what it was. I was like, what's this going to mean for my kids, for my marriage? How am I going to be a hostess extraordinaire and world traveler? Haven't made it to the front page of Forbes and Fortune, which was my dream. And I went into the bathroom and I had to look at myself in the mirror. And I had to have an honest conversation with Jodi. And this is lesson number 2 for surviving challenging times. Sometimes we just have to have that honest conversation where I had to ask myself, what kind of mother do I want to be? What kind of wife? What kind of legacy do I want to leave? And I remember the words of Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, and he said, we begin to achieve greatness when we pass on our values to the next generation. And for me, that I just understood with absolute clarity what I needed to do. That was my lesson number 3. When we were walking out of the hospital and they check your band to make sure you're not stealing the baby, my husband joked, oh, they should have just branded activist on our forehead. Little did he know how prophetic he would be when on the 4th day of my daughter's life, we would be defending her right to exist. When a neighbor, a religious neighbor, came to visit, and she says, you didn't do an amniocentesis and abort? You not have done an amniocentesis. And I was like, well, clearly didn't abort. I'm actually holding the baby. And soon we realized people say the most stupid things. My husband actually wanted to have a T-shirt made for my daughter that said, I have an extra copy of chromosome 21 that accounts for my mental retardation. What's your excuse? At 2 years old, we wanted to get my daughter into her community Jewish day school, the one that her siblings went to, a 2-year-old program. But after much going backwards and forwards, the answer was no. And we were locked out. And I was devastated. Here we were, we hadn't grown up religious. We had chosen our journey. We givers in the community, and now we're locked out. We're locked out, and in like Chutz La'aretz, when you feel locked out, you're locked out of school, shul, community, it all comes together. And I was devastated. And Gavin kept reminding me, and this is another lesson, because sometimes we get distracted by what other people do. And Gavin kept reminding me, don't judge Judaism by the Jews. Anyway, being activists as we were, we decided to protest this decision to the presidents of the school. And they had 2 daughters. Both the daughters were doing their chesed project. Was my daughter, Kayla. You come and visit a special needs kid for an hour a week. I'm going to share with you guys how much I hate chesed. I don't hate chesed for what it stands for, what it's truly meant to be. I hate that fake kind of chesed that we've taught ourselves, that if you write a check, if you drop a meal at someone, if you visit someone for 15 minutes, tick, chesed. No, people want us to open our hearts, our homes, our schools, our shuls. And I think, again, for these trying times we live in, such a valuable lesson. Right now, so many people are doing chesed. But Moshe told the Jewish people, when we do chesed, when we do things, we have to do what's right and what's good. We have to remember that we've got to go that extra mile. It's not just about the chesed, but it's about bringing that love, that care. It's not just about dropping that meal, but it's about opening your home to that family that's been relocated. It's about a hug for the soldiers. It's about genuinely giving that care. So I tried to advocate. I tried to get my daughter in the school, and I kept hitting a no. And eventually I sent a message to the entire school. I had the whole school list. I sent a message. I said I wanted us to be the topic of discussion from gefilte fish to dessert that week. I timed my message. And I asked the rabbi, I said, I'm not asking you to reconsider just for us. And I said, but I'm asking you to reconsider for Kayla's 6-year-old brother, who was asking us lots of questions about this situation. And I told him a story about how Miran had wanted one of these homeless people in New York City to stay in his bed when Gavin gave him money to go and find somewhere to sleep when it was freezing cold. And he said, but don't tell Ima. And Gavin was like, why don't tell Ima? He thought Miran would say, Ima's going to say that the homeless person's dirty or whatever. And he said, Abba, don't tell Ima, because she's going to say, oh, I'm such a mitzvah boy and that's so special. And he said, that's just what Jews do. And I think what a powerful lesson for all of us. I wanted Miran to be in an environment that I didn't want him one day to wake up and say, where was my school? Where was my shul? Where was my values? And right now, in the last 3 weeks, we as Jewish people have been confronted with this like atrocious hate and anti-Semitism, where it's like, okay, it's legitimate to question anti-Semitism and call for our genocide. And right now, we have to ask ourselves, what values do we align ourselves to? Which schools are we sending our kids to? What communities are we hanging out with? I remember going to the supermarket and I'd be like attacked and people would say to me, what do you think your other children are going to think about this fight that you're taking on? And I remember it was so clear for me. I remember just answering, my other children will know that I'll always go into bat for them and I will always stand on the side of right. And right now, we know there is only one side in this discussion, the side of right. I finally found a school that would take my daughter. And it was a school that was on the same street we had lived in, but I'd never sent my other kids. And the principal said to me, Jodi, you hadn't sent your other kids. Why are you sending Kayla? And I said, well, the other schools didn't want my daughter. And she was like, your daughter's accepted, same school, same resources, same everything. But it was the leadership that was different. And we know with water, when water's tainted at the source, water's tainted. And we've seen now some of the most horrific stories of leadership not standing on the side of right. We have to choose who our leaders are. It wasn't easy for me to go from being the shy girl to an activist. I was always, if anybody's on this call and they know me from way back when, I was very shy, never said a word in public. But I realized at some point, if I didn't like what I saw, I would have to be the one who changes it. And as it says in Pirkei Avot, when there's no man, sometimes you've got to be the man. When there's no leader, you've got to be the leader. I think we've seen the most powerful demonstration of this after Black Saturday of October 7th. By October 8th, activists had just gone into action. People didn't wait for instructions. People were just doing, making, planning, organizing. And I think that's exactly, when there's no man, be the man. When there's no leader, be the leader. Each one of us has the opportunity to be a leader, to influence our families, our communities, our workplaces, our schools. We can all make a difference in our own little part of the world. My other hat that I wear is I'm a business owner and I help small businesses grow and figure out their strategic footprint. And one of the things that I always say to my clients first is, what is your mission statement? What is your purpose? What is your reason for being? That's the very first question. And I realized I needed a personal mission statement. I needed to know my why. We all know our how and we know our what. But as people right now, as Jewish people all around the world, secular, religious, doesn't matter where you live, which country, we're all being challenged with this question. Who am I? What does it really mean to be a Jew? And each one of us are having to answer this question. What is our why? And when you can answer that question, you have a compass, you have a direction, it unifies those diverse thoughts and all that chatter. It gives you a guide. It's an essential tool to dealing with challenge. So the title of my book that Lesley showed you, Chutzpah, Wisdom and Wine. So it is a catchy title, but it's actually my life philosophy. Chutzpah, you guys all know what chutzpah is. When I teach groups that are overseas from all around the world, they I say, like, give me words. They say bold, audacious. They usually shout out Israelis. And I agree. There's nothing that says chutzpah more than the startup nation. People who know how to live with chutzpah are people who know how to live with resilience. We know how to take risks. We are creative. We're resourceful. Chutzpah is when you really believe good is not good enough. Chutzpah, and you all know this in Israel, we have no fear of the word no. Rules, well, it's not that you're an anarchist and you don't agree in rules, just rules are the starting point of a negotiation. The other thing about chutzpah is passion. Chutzpah gives you this ability to live your life with deep and meaningful passion. It's also understanding that it's not only the destination, but the journey that counts as well. You know, when people say, the sky is the limit, chutzpah, why does sky need to be the limit? Why can't the sky be the starting point? Box. Oh, think outside of a box. Why does there have to be a box in the first place? But for me, the most defining feature of all for chutzpah, and you see this in Israel every single day, is the absolute and total belief that tomorrow will be better. Wisdom. So I didn't grow up religious. I only studied for a few months in yeshiva until I got kicked out for having a guy come into my room to deliver chocolates. I don't know much Torah, but what Torah I know and whatever I've learned guides my life. I say I'm a modern Jewish woman living according to ancient Jewish values. But even when I speak to other groups that are not Jewish, I always say to my groups, know your wisdom. Everybody needs to know. We know that in Pirkei Avot it says to find yourself a rabbi and a teacher. We all need to have someone who can teach us. We all need to know our wisdom. And I'll share with you, a few years ago on one of our adventure trips, we were hiking in the foothills of the Himalayas and we got lost. And I was with my family and we asked a monk for directions. And he insisted we come to his home and we have a drink in his tiny little garden, and he gave us a cup of tea. And where we were was on the Hummus Trail, which is like the famous places that Israelis, post-army soldiers go, and it's called the Hummus Trail. So he had come across many Israelis, and he said, your people always come to me, and they say, I want to know your wisdom. They want to learn about Buddhism. And he's like, when you know your wisdom, come and ask me about my wisdom. We've seen from the crazy elections in Israel, the US, COVID, vaccinations, and now what's going on in the last 3 weeks in Israel, the war, the calls for genocide. Each one of us needs to know our wisdom, and we need to have that guide for our wisdom. So wine, anybody who knows me, I'm famous for my l'chaims, and I love good red wine. In fact, my Aliyah mantra became, God, give me coffee to deal with the things I can, and wine to deal with the things that I can't. But for me, wine, obviously, it has its sacramental purposes in Judaism, but wine is so much more, because wine, at least metaphorically, is that ability to stop and appreciate. And you know, the attitude of gratitude is one of the most effective tools for building resilience. Stop. Know your blessings. And I also believe in working hard and playing hard. And Gavin and I have been married 30 years. If Hamas isn't stopping us, we go out every single night of our lives, work hard, play hard, stop. Get off that role of being breadwinner, mom, protector. We're always in those roles. Sometimes we just have to stop and enjoy life. And I thank my daughter for teaching me a lesson. You know, the world's very unsure. We don't know anything. We know nothing for sure. The only thing we know is we don't know anything for sure. But Kayla taught me that we can all pivot in the face of change. We can all live an extraordinary life, no matter what the challenge is. And we all have that ability to see that life can be wonderful, even when it's not perfect. Thank you, Lesley. Happy to take questions from anyone.
Great. Firstly, Jodi, I've been totally inspired by you. We've spoken before. We've met up at different events before, and I've also shared with you how similar we are on many, many aspects. We are also very different on many aspects. One of the things is that often I don't get that much sleep, but Jodi gets way less sleep than me. Anyone that knows Jodi knows that she, or has read her book, knows that she doesn't sleep more than 4 hours. So no, I couldn't cope on 4 hours. But we have many, many things that we do have in common. And I agree fully with you. And this is one of the things that I also teach, my group participants, and that this is my mantra too, is that look in the mirror and decide that we want to be the best possible version of ourselves. And how can we be the best possible version of ourselves? One of your slogans that you said as well, the work hard, play hard. That's one of my slogans too. In fact, for anyone that was at the Jerusalem conference 2 months ago, which now seems like a lifetime ago, one of the posters that we held up with our, in front of the banner with our, smiling and everything was the work hard, play hard. So I fully agree as well. Put everything into your work and put everything, into your life and what you want to do, and not to forget, which is one of the reasons that I also chose to move to the coast, is that we don't want to delay our passions. You can now decide today, yes, I want to do ABC, and then put into progress the steps that you can do and need to do in order to get there. So what I'd like you to do for the last minute or two, and if you do have any questions, I'll see if there are in the chat, or just to comment anything that you've gained from this, is think about what Jodi has said, where you're going in life, what you want to do in life. Sometimes we need, unfortunately, or fortunately, something or someone to come into our lives. And I also, had a child that was born with certain things, not Down syndrome. That was my initial fear initially. We need to talk about that, Jodi. In fact, we need to have our cup of coffee as well as our glass of wine. We need to definitely do that. And, that also taught me many things in life. And everything that happens to us, every experience that we have is basically something that teaches us what we want to do and where we want to be in life. I'm seeing Jenny commented here, I'm taking away to reconnect with my mission and purpose. And that's very true, Jenny. Totally agree with you and get that. And I'm sure many of you have not written anything here, but you feel the same way in terms of wanting to take away something and looking in the mirror and deciding, what you want to do and where you want to be. So, Jodi, I thank you very much for being here. Is there any final word or anything that you want to say?
Happy for people to connect with me, Jodi's Voice, on social media. You can buy my book on Amazon or in the English section of Stemansky. And always happy to connect with people, social media, and happy to answer questions. I'm very, very honest. So you can ask me anything. I don't mind at any point. And you're welcome for Shabbat. You can all come for Shabbat to one of the Samuel's famous Shabbat meals.
Right. That's one thing that we will read in the book as well. And we see on social media how Jodi's and Gavin's house is just totally open on Shabbat. And that's a very special thing too. So, ladies and gents, we've come to the end of another 30 minutes of inspiration. Thank you so much for joining us. Every Monday between 9 and 9:30 Israel time, put it in your calendar. Next week, we have a very special speaker. Her name is, and she's here today, Satsun Kalman Chassid. Yes, if her name sounds interesting, that's because she is interesting. So join us next week too, to find out more about Sats and how she's going to inspire us. And have a great week. Have a safe week. Thank you again, Jodi. I'm Lesley Kaplan. Thank you to our sponsors and co-sponsors, ACI and to Israel Properties. And I look forward to seeing you next Monday, same time, same place. Have a great week, safe week, and a great week. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.